I'm now going to intersect two surfaces to trim out a badge area like this on the rear surface of our car. And previously we used curves to cut out this shape for a rear light. And I've created a layer for this curve, so I'll turn that off for now. But this time I'm going to use a surface to create a badge area here. So I'll make the surfaces layer active, and I'll just turn off the polygon model as well. I'm just going to use a primitive sphere shape to create my badge, and I'll curve snap it onto this edge. But because my rear surface is angled, I'm going to have to do a non-P scale, and then try to rotate it to the right angle. But that's going to be a bit too approximate. So I'll just delete that one, and to make life easier for myself I can use a construction plane. And if you remember, the geometry plane lines up to the geometry I curve snap to. And if I now set that as the construction plane, I get my grid oriented on the rear surface. And this means that I can now switch to the top view and then grid snap a sphere to the construction plane origin. And so the orientation is now in a much more useful direction. But if I use non-P scale in this perspective view and I use my right mouse button, it's not scaling correctly. So instead I'm going to work in the 2D view where the constraints work as I'd expect. And I might move it down as well to get a nicer intersection. Now I've created a full sphere, but I've only got half a rear surface. So I should have created a 180-degree sphere. But I'll use this to show you the difference between detaching and trimming. And we'll need to see the CVs. Now when I use detach, I can only use it in the direction of one of the isopalms, and I'll just control snap that. And watch these CVs when I say go. They change. And it's a periodic surface, so I'll have to do that again on the other half. And again you'll see that the CVs change. So now it's created two completely separate NURB surfaces. So I can delete that one. So the Detach tool creates a new edge to the NURBS layout. So let's instead now look at trimming. And here we can see how the two surfaces intersect, but Alias needs to explicitly calculate that intersection. And so we do that using the Intersect tool on the Surface Edit palette. And this asks me to choose one of the surfaces, say go, and then choose the intersecting surface. And it's not clear what it's done yet, but if I do a pick curve on surface, you can see that it's created one curve on surface on the rear window and one on the sphere. And that's because the intersect options are set to create a curve on surface on both surfaces. So this means I can now trim both of them, and I'll do the rear window first. So I'll select it, say which part I want to keep, and then hit the keep button. And now you can see it's been trimmed away. And I can do the same with the sphere. And I can either keep the outside part to create a badge emboss, or if I made a mistake, I could say revert, and then choose discard instead to create an indent, which could be either for another badge or could be for a handle recess maybe. And I've still got construction history, so if I wanted to move the sphere upwards to get rid of the undercut, the trim will update. And I can continue to work with the construction history and reshape the sphere, or I could turn on the CVs and start to sculpt those. And note that because it was a trim, I still have all the CVs for the full hemisphere, so I need to make sure that I pick all of them as I shape it. So that's ending up more like a handle recess. So I can then display the symmetry, and I can toggle out of the construction plane. And if I want to hide that plane, then I can just use the Show menu and turn off the construction objects. So now that you understand the process of intersecting and trimming, you can find lots of examples on finished models. If you suspect that something's been intersected, then just use the Untrimmed tool, and you'll be able to see the overbuilt surfaces that were used. And sometimes the surfaces may have been successively trimmed. So in this case you could set the Untrimmed tool to All, so that every individual trim gets undone at once. You may also want to take a look at some of the shapes you did in the skill builders in section 2, where we just placed primitives together. But now you can intersect them. And then with trimming, you can trim back the main surface, and if you're careful, I should be able to trim all of these cylinders in one go. And instead of having them sticking out of the design, I can have them as indents. But because they were grouped primitives, I've got these end caps that I need to pick individually, and I'll just make them invisible. So if you want to practice, you may want to have some fun with the charging stations. Otherwise, if you're feeling confident with intersecting and trimming, there'll be plenty more examples throughout the rest of the tutorials.